G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week, and thank you for being here with me again. If you'd like to be more involved in the conversation, because the comments here can get a bit, well, have a look. Some people look just for entertainment, but come across to Telegram. We really, I think, do have a good community to be able to talk some things out. No one gets banned unless they're just absolutely bullying other people with nothing really to add. But we have today a lot to go over. As always, we'll look at the maps. We'll look at sanctions in Russia, sanctions against Russian weapons, and what a think tank has come out with are these sanctions working or not? When we'll link this to my friend who's a PhD in electronics and what he has said about the chips. We need to then talk about a rising problem in Ukraine with the power grid and how this will look going into then the end of the year. That links in with the ICC. We'll look at a phone call between the US and Russia. Hasn't happened for a while. We need to look at some very interesting footage, and we need to talk about the new Secretary General of NATO and how this is good for Ukraine. But where I want to start, and something that will get downplayed, is North Korea. Now, it's been announced that North Korea will deploy troops into Ukraine. Now, people quickly disregard North Korea due to it being an authoritarian dictatorship. Of what, yes, I agree with. Okay, but let's look beyond, I guess, the politics and human rights abuses there. Let's put that aside. Don't pay off what a country like this can actually then achieve in industrial capacity because, well, it might be a little bit cheaper because of that, and loyalty of soldiers there as well. Now, things we need to point out. North Korea has delivered between 5 and 8 times the amount of shells to Russia than the West has to Ukraine. Now, is a spade a spade? No, these are worse shells comparatively. Yes, they have exploded in the breach of some guns. Yes, some have exploded on transit, but it's in the millions. And these are shells that can still be fired. They can be rigged up to drones. They can be rigged to other unmanned systems, VBIEDs, things like this. It's still a big deal. Let's not discount that. Russia had a massive artillery shortage, and that has gone away basically in the same time that this has come to fruition with North Korea and this then alliance. So don't just discredit this because you get stuck on the politics and human rights abuses. We should never ignore that. It's horrible. But when we're looking tactically, we need to look just beyond that bias. And also something in this, we're not fully aware to what extent China may be using North Korea as an intermediary. Because, of course, we've seen them use North Korea to build things in China as well. So let's have a look at what has been said, what has come across my desk as well from an anonymous contact too. Now, this came through late last night for me, just beyond midnight. North Korea sending troops is also very bad news. This guy's in Ukraine and he's fighting there. If it was just Russia, yes, we can win. But we are fighting North Korea, Iran, Syria, Russia, and China. And you could flip this on its head and say, if Russia was just fighting Ukraine, then they could win. But it's fighting then the entirety of NATO and the massive economic powerhouse beyond this. And this links into my next point, that this is the first country to, I guess, officially send third-party troops to Ukraine. And yes, there's foreigners serving in the Ukrainian and Russian forces, and we know that likely there's some senior command who are there officially. We know that through, say, the leaked German phone calls. But as far as like everyday land troops, this is, at least by I'm tracking, the first, and I don't know if it will be the last. Of course, we've seen what Macron has said about NATO troops going into Ukraine. So let's look over this, and I think there's some important bits people are missing here. Now, this was with General Patrick Ryder as well in a Q&A. I have 2 questions on North Korea, Russia, and Ukraine. First question, Russian President Putin recognized North Korea as a nuclear state. The US Congress is also talking about arming South Korea with nuclear weapons to response to North Korea's nuclear weapons. We know North Korea has nuclear weapons. Does it have the ability for the delivery system? That seems to be more where the issue is. But like I've said many times, we don't know where the back scratching on each other is happening here between Kim Jong-un and Putin as well. We know what Kim Jong will want is technology, that Russia have? Could it be satellites? Could it be delivery systems? This is one of the things that we don't know. Now, he says, our policy hasn't changed in denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. You know, we continue to work with the ROK and Japanese allies and others in the region to ensure security and stability through the Indo-Pacific. I'll just leave it there. I was reading this philosophy thing the other day of instead of denuclearizing other areas, what we should do is break up the nukes held between Russia and the US. If every country has like 5 nukes, not enough to end the world, but enough to have serious damage, would that then have just such a gridlock that no one would ever launch war? Like if Ukraine had nuclear weapons still, would have this ever come in? There's just something to think about. It's not on the point. But a quick follow-up. North Korea's Central Military Commission announced that North Korea would join forces with the Russian military as part of the North Korea and Russian military alliance. A North Korean engineer unit would be dispatched to Donetsk in Ukraine, which remains occupied by Russia. It will be dispatched as early as next month. Now, this is the part I think most people are missing. An army engineer unit. I think a lot of people don't understand what engineers do. Engineers do things like clear mines, build bridges, build roads, fix railways, dig holes. Now, all of this stuff is very man-heavy. It requires a lot of man-hours and a lot of people. And a lot of this, say like digging holes, it's low-skill work, but it takes a long time. You need a lot of people to do it. And this is one of the problems in the army, is you can end up with very high-skilled soldiers digging holes or putting ballast back in for a train to go over. This is where I see this as important, that, yeah, are these guys going to be trained to be bloody SF hitters? No, we know that. But are there a lot of people who could backfill positions, therefore get more people to the front? Absolutely. And we've talked about this is one of the problems that Ukraine is facing with this manpower shortage, is that third line. Could this be filled by NATO troops, not, directly on the front, but they're doing things in the, putting bloody tyres back on vehicles at industrial facilities that have been damaged, digging holes, things like this, low-skilled stuff that isn't directly front line, but clears up more troops to go on the front. That is what I am reading into this. And clearing mines takes a long time. Digging holes takes a long time. A lot of people. This is where I see this could be very important. And he says, yes, sending North Korea, it's certainly something to keep an eye on. I think that if I were North Korean military personnel management, I would be questioning my choices on sending my forces to be cannon fodder in an illegal war against Ukraine. Now, as well, we know the losses in attritional war are massive, especially in the beginning for then troops on the front, because in an attritional war, by the doctrine, a lot of the training and experience comes on time on the front. But these soldiers will then gain experience. North Korean military personnel management, the leadership, will gain some experience here too. That is things to be thought of. We can't just discount all of this because of the cringy videos of dudes kicking tires on fire and chopping plates. This is still things, and like you said, something to keep an eye on. And I see, even if you just deployed 10,000 dudes to dig holes for defensive works, that frees up a lot of other then assets. I think this is then something we need to keep an eye on. I think people downplay it there and just have that cannon fodder. That's the part they're pulling out of this whole thing. Now, I want to have a look at some footage here. I've got some impressive stuff, some stuff I haven't seen before. So this is a Bradley with its 25mm, and 25mm is a massive bloody gun. For those who speak in inches, you got 5.56 is like your typical NATO round, like 5.56. 25mm is then massive. Of course, there's a mounted gun. And you can see then an FPV drone here. We're assuming Russian. And you can see the trajectory of these 25mm rounds then firing at this. And one of these actually engages, by the look, onto the drone. Incredibly, well, I'll put 50-50 luck and skill on that then shooting across. Now, people have pointed out, oh, but the money of the round is not worth the drone. The damage that a cheap drone can do is in the millions of dollars. These rounds are in the tens or hundreds of dollars each. Again, worth it. Anyway, we need to look at a Fab 1500 in Kherson. Now, this is just interesting footage. I've never seen this angle before. You can actually see when we saw glide bomb. Have a look at this gliding. You'll look left to right of the screen here. Proper. Look at that. Moving in. Way slower than I would have thought. Now, I believe this is slowed down. Oh, maybe. I don't know. But impressive footage. It gives us an idea of then those coming in, and you could see that coming. It's like at school dodgeball when you're going to get hit in the face and it sort of goes still for a second, but a very interesting angle to actually then see this. So we know new NATO Secretary General has come in, Mark Rutte. Sorry, I don't know, but this is from NATO's website. And they've selected Mark Rutte as the next Secretary General. Now, Hungary did have a problem with this, so did Turkey, but they both have come to other conclusions and deals. We're happy for it to go through. Now, he was the Dutch Prime Minister for 14 years and the next Secretary General, replacing then Jens Stoltenberg, who we talk about on this. Something interesting in this, and Australia is not part of NATO, so I don't know all the NATO politics, but the Secretary General's in that position for 10 years, and that seems like a hell of a long time to have someone in a position like this. Typically, in political positions, you're there for 4 years or maybe 6, depending on the country. 10 seems like a long time. Think back to 2014. Now, who's Mark Rutte? Well, you might have seen this before. This was at the Swiss Peace Summit for Ukraine that we haven't heard much really about since then. I'm turning bloody microphones on. But this was in response then when Putin released his peace plan, or basically on the day of then the conference. And this is the first time I'd really seen this guy.
What do you think about it? The proposal?
The peace proposal, absolutely crazy.
But how do you want to talk in the future with Russia?
I think he will come. He has to come because otherwise the train is now leaving without him. So
saying the train is leaving without Russia, that Putin will have to come to some sort of peace conference in the future.
But first this meeting.
How you'll make him come?
Oh, by having a success here, and clearly the fact that he came out with this crazy proposal yesterday shows you that he is panicking.
What kind of?
So that was mainly the clip that I've seen, saying that because of his proposal brought forward, that clearly then Putin is panicking. Now, what we do know about Mark Rutte is he is a huge supporter of Ukraine and will be Secretary General of NATO for then the next 10 years. Within that time frame, that is what Ukraine will be looking at, getting into NATO. Of course, we know that can't start until the guns fall silent here, however that then happens, but potentially he will be the one as Secretary General when that happens, if and when that happens, then for Ukraine. Now, let's have a look at a phone call between... Actually, no, let's not. Let's have a look at these Russian weapons. This is very interesting and something we've spoken on before. Now, this was by CBC or CBN, but Western sanctions have failed to undermine Russia's weapon production, and Moscow has even managed to ramp up the manufacturing of key weapons to fuel its war against Ukraine. Now, although US and partners have touted an array of sanctions in the past 2 years choke off Moscow's access to key parts to build new weapons, Russia has dramatically increased the production of artillery rounds, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles since its full-scale invasion. In 2021, Moscow produced 56 KH-101s missiles per year. By last year, it had manufactured 460 missiles. Russia's stock of Iskander ballistic missiles has increased dramatically from about 50 before the invasion to 180. Remember, this is in the stock, even though Russia has launched large amounts of missiles on the battlefield. So that its stock, it's saying, is 180, even though it's still launching them in. Therefore, you can see the production has ramped up. To make munitions for missiles and drones, Russia depends on microelectronics imported from abroad, but US and European measures have failed to block Moscow's access. We'll talk about this. The expansion of Russia's weapon production offers clear evidence that thousands of Western sanctions have proved ineffective. That, in summary, despite the diligent efforts of many civil servants backed by political will and disrupt Russia's military-industrial output, there is little to show for it. Now, my PhD friend, not pretty huge, but very smart guy, we have spoken about this, that Western domination in the chip market is limited to chips of smaller size. They have collective monopoly over sub-15 nanometer architectures and a good grasp of the sub-30 nm market. And these chips are not used in weaponry. And there's another thing he explains this. We're actually going to do an interview specifically just on chips and Russia's access, China's access, and the Western sanctions. Even if Russia hits its production capacity, China can produce them. Heck, even if they order these chips from intermediaries, even the US might be producing them. I thought Russia may lack some modern sensors, but I haven't seen a drop in the accuracy or in the general quality of the Russian weapons to suggest Russia lacks any electric components. If this was in 2008, Russia would have starved for civilian communications components, talking about Huawei. Look, and I think this is important when we speak about politicians, civil servants in what we spoke on the last one versus the reality here. When I say I don't think impractical, I don't expect, I generally mean impossible. Science and engineering have different jargon that prohibits in saying impossible or bullshit. Are you out of your mind, you uneducated swine? So scientists and engineers that hopefully the Western countries consulted before imposing these sanctions probably used these words in their reports, and the policymakers, unknowing what these people meant, thought that they were shutting off a possible, albeit small, opportunity for Russian weapon manufacturers. The truth is, these sanctions only hurt Russia for at most 2 months before their supply chain then made adjustments and fixed that. And this is the reality of what we're seeing, at least from an outside looking in on these weapons. There seemed to be a shortage in the beginning. We got lots of report, 1 or 2 more attacks. And now we're seeing new missiles and new versions of missiles coming in every week, and new versions being seen then on the battlefield, as well as drones. Now, let's talk about the Ukraine power grid. Now, I've spoken about this before, and contacts of mine are saying that this is an understated how big this problem will be, and this will be a large story into the future. Now, we looked at yesterday that Shoigu and Gerasimov have had arrest warrants for them issued by the ICC directly then for this. And the US has backed those arrest warrants. Of course, they haven't backed the ones against the Israeli officials, calling in the whole system here from either side, going, well, you can't do one and not the other. And I completely see why people are saying, hey, you can't have it one way and not the other when you feel like it, or your allies in one. Should they be out for all these individuals? That's my feeling. Yeah, I think the arrest warrants for Shoigu, Gerasimov, some of the people in Israel, as well as Bush and Blair, and these, I would back. It doesn't mean then they're going to get charged on that. But as far as investigation further into this, beyond reasonable doubt, proof one way or the other, that's where I sit on this. But let's have a look here. That no missiles for defense, no money to rebuild. Ukraine's energy dilemma. Ukraine has lost half its remaining power generation capability since March this year. So since March has lost half of what then was remaining. 9 gigawatts is a huge number. If the figures are accurate, it would mean that Ukraine only had approximately 18 gigawatts remaining in the system in March, prior to the renewed Russian strikes this year. Less than a third of its pre-war 56 gigawatt figure. This continues. Even in the summer, we've had 40 to 45% lower consumption than in winter. We have a deficit of power that cannot be covered by imports of electricity from Europe. So even in the summer, when they have 45% less use, they're still having a deficit of power, and the power in some areas, I know in Kyiv, people are reporting 4 to 6 hours per day, and that people aren't even running their fridges due to this and giving up on that food. This creates huge issues, not only militarily, but humanitarian too, what can affect then, of course, decisions going forward. The number of EU nations now transferring 1.7 gigawatts of energy to Ukraine to help cope with the deficit. But as you can see, when we look at these original numbers of down from 56, I believe Ukraine exported a lot of electricity in the beginning too. But if you see that 9 is remaining, it was 18, 1.7 isn't that much going in. It'll be interesting to see if the EU can help sustain this electricity in Ukraine. It appears that for every missile that we have right now, 5-6 Russian missiles are coming in. If 10 missiles are coming in, you need at least 12 missiles in the air defense. So even when we start recovering, start repairing, there's no means right now that to protect the recovered units. This is the problem. Ukraine do not have the air defense systems to cover all of their necessary targets. And of course, air defense is going to have to be allocated to where the F-16s are. They're going to have to be allocated to areas to try and counter Russian fighter bomber aircraft. They're going to have to protect other areas too, that there's never going to be enough to cover all of this. Well, we've seen the amount that would be needed. I think they put out was 25 or 26 Patriot systems. And the West is struggling to really scrape together 4, 5, 6 for this. And if Israel have an invasion into Lebanon against, I can't say the word, then we could see even a further reduction in availability of Patriot missiles as well. This is, I think, will be a larger story popping up of how this will look and how it will be for the average civilian in Ukraine as well, and the crisis then this could create, because of course this can then affect things like sewage treatment plants, water plants, all of this, but also it can affect then the front line. This is why these electric facilities are considered, like oil depots, are considered then dual use targets. Now, before we have a look at the maps, we need to talk about a phone call between the US and Russia. So Patrick Ryder reported on this again separately. Secretary Austin also spoke on the phone today with Russian Defense Minister Andriy Borisov. During the call, the Secretary emphasized the importance of maintaining lines of communication amid Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. The last time Secretary Austin spoke to his Russian counterpart, then Russian Minister Sergei Shoigu, was on the 15th of March 2023. So well over a year ago since there's been any communications there between the two from Russia and the US. Now, of course, what this is in response to is then that missile in Crimea and the civilians then hurt there. That's all this. Now, the brief readout will be posted on defense.gov. Went to defense.gov and this looks similar. It's basically the exact same thing. So we don't really know, but that they're talking about maintaining lines of open communication between each other. This could be a movement as well for more comms between them. We know in the Tucker-Putin interview that Putin has said he hadn't spoken to the American administration since then, the beginning of the war. So I think this is something just to be aware of happening too. So here is Ukraine, the center, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, I want to come down into the Kherson Oblast down in here. Now, this map has been having some problems, so just bear with me if it takes a while to load. But we have then Oleshki down in here. Now, we have seen some photographs of across then onto the left bank here, large fires taking place over on the left bank. Now, in Russian occupied area. Now, one thing I have been told by a few guys is really keep an eye on this. There's been a lot of fires down here and shaping the battlefield for further actions. Now, I don't know what here my monkey brain tells me crossing the Dnipro is a death trap for logistics and supply much more than your artillery on the right bank can reach out and touch. But I guess we will see then what occurs. We know there's been a lot of fires across here and potentially then shaping the battlefield. Let me know what you think. But where we're going to go is let's turn on then this. Now, nothing in Robotny, nothing in Urazani, but we start getting some changes. Now, Krasnoarivka, there are reports that Ukraine is having a withdrawal out of some areas of Krasnoarivka, as we see then this Russian advancement by the red check through here as well. So keep an eye on here. We know this stalled for a couple of weeks, but it looks like we got an update over the last couple of days. And again, today, it looks like there's some movement happening here. No changes seen today through Avdiivka. This is one of the first days, along with yesterday, that we have seen no real advancement out from here. And nothing on this New York front after this movement since the 2014 line, which we may see more, may see less. Still nothing on this map around Chasiv Yar, but we do have some photographs of Chasiv Yars just can be completely flattened. That's what happens when you're dropping Fabs, thermobarics, tanks fighting within here. We come up then to Rozdelivka, or I'll call this the Rozdelivka front, and towards Vemimka, we do see a slight bit of ground made near Spurny and along then this railway line in here. We know over the past couple of weeks out from Berestov that Russia has jumped up through this area too. So we do have, this is the first time we see a change then on this map, shown in, though, a different area. So this is showing Rozdelivka here. Let's have a look where this train line then turns out to the left. So it's saying that basically Rozdelivka has come under Russian control. Doesn't show this specific change, but shows the same amount of ground. Last 3 days, Russian army managed to capture most of the locality of Rozdelivka. So we know this is then what I'll call the Seversk front, that there hasn't been much movement on basically the entire, say, last year and a half. Could be longer, but this is an area still to then keep an eye on, especially in this Kremenar forest. We see a lot of then back and forwards. And we come up a little bit to the north. We're actually up in the northern corner. And then we'll look for Stelmakivka here. We do have a Syriac map update just in, if I can load it. Oops, sorry, I've got multiple open. So let's have a look here. This is Stelmakivka. So coming right up onto the border here by Syriac. And this same cut in shows about the same area. So showing more ground made up in here, but not significantly too different to what we are seeing. See this tree line here? So just about here. So keep an eye on some of these fronts as well. So it reaches the first houses. We will see what shifts and changes in this front. Now we need to come up a little bit further north, this Sinkivka front here. Now let's have a look here. as Surik has shown some change, and this is on the same axis to what then we saw the grey zone shift over the past day or so. Let's have a look right there, as well as Noel reports did show a change in here as well, I believe. So looking at that. Now coming to the north, still no changes shown in here. This dislocation of troops, I'm going to say there's some logistical supply. I'm going to say this isn't cut off because over the past like at least week and a half that these guys have been in here, there's no way you'd still be able to be fighting in here if you were cut off in such a small area with however many troops that people have been quoting, say 400 in here. I'm surprised that there's been no changes shown on this map. We do know by multiple maps, even Russian sources maps, that Ukraine, if this was blue to be correct, has pushed back into areas in here. I have talked about some of the problems potentially with an offensive operation at this point in time. But let's look at what Surik has as a bit of then an overall. The summer begins on the Ukrainian front with the continuation of the offensive actions of the Russian army along the entire front. The arrival of new reinforcements and the latest rotations have allowed a new effort of the Russians to maintain their momentum, especially in Donetsk. The Ugledar front and the one west of Avdiivka have practically leveled out, creating two spearheads from which Russian forces continue to capture the Donbass. So let's have then a look down in, so he's talking then Ugledar, where things have been moving, Mariinka, Avdiivka front. This is the region of which he was speaking. Meanwhile, in the north, the Russians broke through the 2014 defences and entered the Pivnevchi agglomeration, where their heavy street fighting started. This axis should be considered a diversionary axis, the Chasiv Yar and Povrovsk being the main ones to cut off the supply lines to large agglomeration south of Konstantinivka. So talking right in this New York front we've been speaking to try and draw from Chasiv Yar. In Chasiv Yar, fighting continues in the eastern microdistrict. We're talking about the main battle of this 2024, in which both sides are suffering most of the casualties due to the tenacity of the urban fighting and elevated position of the city. No significant changes are expected on this front until late summer. On the other hand, Seversk front has been reactivated and Russian troops are advancing from the south towards Ukrainian bastion, while fighting continues in Bilorivka with hardly any significant variation. So this front here, talking then Bilorivka. We have even seen Russian commanders comment on how good the Ukrainian defence has been around Seversk. And this is translating to the maps. The changes on here since 2022, absolutely minimum. Now, let's continue here. Something similar is happening in Luhansk. The Russian army continues pressing the Ukrainian army along the whole oblast, trying to look for openings that allow it to reach the Oskil River. For the moment, the gains are limited and the war of positions continues here and on the northwestern front. On the front north of Kharkiv, the initiative has now passed to Ukrainian forces. The arrival of reinforcements from the south and east has enabled Kyiv to contain the Russian advances and begin a counterattack to regain lost territory. Fighting in Vovchansk continues unabated in what has become the largest cemetery for soldiers on both sides. There is talk of the possibility that Russia may end up withdrawing its soldiers after losing the initial momentum. However, the construction of fortresses near the border seems to indicate the Russians are planning to stay there. If you want to know about this, look at my video yesterday in Zaporizhia. The Russian army managed to recapture the locality of Robotny, while in here and Staromorsky was recaptured in the beginning to reverse the Ukrainian gains from last year's counteroffensive. A similar situation is occurring in Kherson, where the Russians have managed to recapture some points of the eastern bank of the Dnieper, so the left bank, and the rest of summer is expected to see the continuation of Russian offensive and completion of some of the main Russian objectives in the Donbass. The northern front is expected to continue to take centre stage as the Ukrainian army prepares a counterattack and Russian forces reinforce positions due to numerical inferiority. As always, the war is sadly far from over. The war of attrition continues. And like I always say, this war is far, far, far from over and will absolutely have the worst days yet to come. Now, I've actually just missed something on this map. I did not notice this today. Sorry. Terney front here, we do have then a large Ukrainian push back in this direction. We know Surik reported down in the south here happened maybe a week ago, but this is showing a lot more than around this front. So we'll wait to see if other maps then back this up. I wish they'd put new advances in a Czech blue. It's easier to then see, but there we go. So there has been a Ukrainian advancement there. I absolutely missed that until the very last minute. Anyway, legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day. I hope you're looking after yourself, and I will speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.